The Martian battlefield was supposed to be humanity's greatest stand, or at least that's what General Dominic Krauss had believed. When the Zelari first invaded the solar system, Earth's nations had united, pouring their resources into Project Aegis, a last-ditch planetary defense force. The battle for Mars was to be humanity's proving ground. But as the war began, the Zelari did something unexpected. They laughed. Hovering above the battlefield in their sleek, silver warships, the reptilian-like invaders chattered in their guttural language, their laughter echoing through translated comms. They were taller than humans, their emerald green skin lined with bioluminescent veins that pulsed with energy. Their elongated, pupilless eyes shimmered with condescension as they observed the battlefield below. "They mock us," muttered Lieutenant Sayana Patel, scanning the enemy formations through her visor. She adjusted her X-suit's targeting HUD, but it was no use. The Zelari weren't even trying to take cover anymore. General Krauss clenched his jaw. Let them laugh. It wasn't just their superior technology that made the Zelari confident. It was our aim. Every railgun shot, every missile, every orbital cannon blast seemed wildly off target. Shots streaked through space, missing entire fleets. Artillery shells exploded harmlessly miles away from enemy formations. Even drones sent on suicide missions veered off course. These Zelari warriors doubled over in amusement. Some even stopped firing, convinced humanity was too incompetent to be a threat. From their perspective, it was a massacre. Their plasma cannons burned through Earth's defensive lines with ease. Infantry units disintegrated under the relentless bombardment. The war, if one could even call it that, was an embarrassment to human pride. Sana bit her lip, watching the destruction unfold. "This isn't working. We're getting wiped out." General Krauss remained impassive, his gaze fixed on the battle map displayed in the command center aboard the UNS Valkyrie, one of Earth's last remaining warships. The vessel trembled as another Zelari beam tore through its outer hull, but Krauss didn't flinch. His fingers hovered over a command console, hesitating for only a moment before he pressed the final sequence. The real battle was about to begin. Deep beneath the frozen methane lakes of Titan, Earth's last stronghold remained hidden. Dr. Elira Monroe, one of the lead strategists for Project Aegis, watched the live feed from Mars on a holographic display. Next to her stood Admiral Riker, a grim-faced veteran who had seen more battles lost than won. "They're buying it," she whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of anxiety and anticipation. Admiral Riker smirked, arms crossed over his chest. Hook, line, and sinker. For months, Earth's brightest minds had been working on a new kind of warfare, not one based on brute force, but on deception. Our erratic aim wasn't due to human incompetence, it was a carefully executed ruse. All our missed shots weren't misses at all. Every railgun round, every missile, and every drone that had gone off course had actually been laying the foundation for the real attack. Nanite beacons, disguised as debris, had drifted into enemy formations. Electromagnetic pulse generators had been hidden inside abandoned orbital platforms. Seismic warheads had been buried beneath the Martian crust. Each seemingly failed strike was, in reality, positioning our greatest weapons right where we needed them. Humanity had spent centuries perfecting misinformation, decoys, and psychological warfare. Now, for the first time, we were using it against an alien enemy. The Zelari thought they were watching us fail. In reality, we were aiming at something far bigger. The moment of truth arrived at exactly 1,900 hours Earth Standard Time. The Zelari fleet, still entertained by humanity's terrible aim, was clustered together in what they assumed was a safe position, just above Mars' northern hemisphere, near Olympus Mons. Their commanders believed they had already won. They had stopped maneuvering, stopped strategizing. They were waiting for the final death throes of humanity's defense. That was when Dr. Monroe sent the activation signal. Across the battlefield, humanity's misses came to life. Nanite swarms hidden in wreckage suddenly surged forward, their microscopic forms devouring Zalari hulls like acid. Invisible to the naked eye, they ate through the molecular bonds of enemy warships, reducing once impenetrable armor to dust in seconds. Zalari screams filled the comm channels as their ships crumbled around them. Electromagnetic pulses erupted from abandoned satellites, frying their communication networks. The Zalari's sophisticated targeting systems blinked out in an instant. Their once unstoppable plasma cannons sputtered and died. The confidence that had filled their voices moments ago turned to panic. Seismic warheads buried under the Martian soil detonated, unleashing planet-wide tremors that split the battlefield apart. The ground forces that had been laughing at human incompetence suddenly found themselves swallowed by the very planet they had sought to conquer. Crevices the size of city blocks opened beneath their feet, swallowing entire battalions in an instant. And the biggest trick of all? Mars wasn't the real target. The real target had always been the Zalari's primary mothership, an immense city-sized warship that had been observing from what they believed was a safe distance. Every missed missile, every stray energy blast had actually been calibrating Earth's secret weapon, Project Nemesis, a quantum-locked gravitational bomb designed to create a localized singularity. The Zalari had mistaken Earth's desperation for weakness. They had no idea they were standing in a carefully woven web of destruction. By the time they realized what was happening, it was too late. The gravitational bomb detonated. A miniature black hole formed at the heart of the Zalari mothership. The massive vessel twisted and contorted, its hull buckling under the sheer force of its own collapsing gravity. The screams of the Zalari commanders were cut short as the event horizon expanded, consuming them in an instant. The fleet that had once loomed over Mars like an unbreakable wall was now a chaotic swirl of debris, their invincible armada shattered beyond recognition. For the first time in history, the Zalari stopped laughing. And humanity? We stood tall, watching the enemy flee in terror. A transmission came through the comms, a garbled voice from the Zalari High Command. Their arrogance was gone, their superiority shattered. Happens. What are you? General Krauss allowed himself a rare smirk. He leaned forward, his voice calm and unwavering. We're the species that learned how to miss on purpose. And with that, humanity had rewritten the rules of war. The battle for Mars had shifted the momentum of the war. But it was far from over. While humanity reveled in its unexpected triumph, the cost of victory loomed heavily over those who had orchestrated it. Beneath the surface of Titan, where the air was thick with tension and the hum of machinery never ceased, Dr. Ilara Monroe sat in silence, staring at the aftermath displayed on the holographic table before her. The debris field surrounding Mars was immense. Broken fragments of Zalari ships floated aimlessly, a grim reminder of the conflict. Among the wreckage were human vessels, their own scars and sacrifices visible. Though the Zalari mothership had been destroyed, smaller enemy fleets still dotted the solar system, regrouping and waiting for orders. The game wasn't over. It had simply shifted to a new phase. Admiral Riker entered the room, his heavy boots echoing against the metallic floor. He was a hulking figure, his presence alone commanding attention. Without a word, he poured himself a cup of the bitter black coffee that had become his lifeline. After a long sip, he turned to Ilara. "Nemesis worked," he said, his voice gravelly but tinged with satisfaction. Ilara didn't respond immediately. Her gaze was fixed on the hologram, where the blackened remnants of the Zalari mothership still spiraled into the gravitational singularity it had created. "It worked," she agreed, her tone flat. "But the Zalari won't make the same mistake twice." Riker chuckled, the sound devoid of humor. "No, they won't. But that's the thing about war, isn't it? The moment you think you've seen every trick, someone finds a new one." Ilara leaned back in her chair, exhaustion etched into her features. The sleepless nights, the endless calculations, the moral compromises. It was all catching up to her. Project Nemesis had been a gamble, a weapon so destructive that even its creators had feared its use. The fact that it had worked didn't erase the unease it left in its wake. "And what's our next trick, Riker?" she asked quietly. "Because they'll come back, stronger, angrier, smarter." Riker set his coffee down, folding his arms across his chest. "They'll come back, sure, but they won't be the same. We rattled them, Ilara. They're scared of us now. That's a weapon in itself." Ilara wasn't so sure. Fear was a double-edged sword. It could drive an enemy to retreat, or it could push them to desperation, and desperate enemies made for unpredictable ones. In the weeks following the battle, humanity worked feverishly to capitalize on its fleeting advantage. Mars, battered and broken, became the staging ground for Earth's renewed defense efforts. Engineers, scientists, and soldiers poured onto the planet, salvaging what they could from the wreckage and fortifying positions for the inevitable counterattack. General Dominic Krauss had relocated to the Martian Command Center, overseeing operations with an iron will. The victory had done little to soften his demeanor. If anything, it had made him more relentless. "We need to keep the pressure on them," Krauss barked during a briefing with his senior staff. The room was dimly lit, the only illumination coming from the holographic displays that showed the Zolari fleet movements. "The moment we let up, they'll strike back, and we won't have another nemesis to bail us out." Sana Patel, now promoted to captain after her pivotal role in the battle, spoke up. "Our resources are stretched thin as it is. If we push too hard, we risk overextending ourselves. Mars isn't just a battlefield anymore. It's a liability. We can't defend it forever." Krauss shot her a glare, but it lacked its usual venom. She wasn't wrong, and he knew it. "Ilara and her team are working on new countermeasures," he said after a pause. "Until then, we hold Mars at all costs. This planet is more than a battlefield. It's a symbol. If we lose it, we lose everything." While the generals and admirals debated strategy, Ilara found herself drawn deeper into her work. Project Nemesis had been her brainchild, but now she was tasked with creating something even more ambitious. The Exalari would adapt, as all intelligent beings did, and humanity needed to stay one step ahead. In the dimly lit lab beneath Titan's surface, Ilara and her team worked tirelessly. The room buzzed with activity. Machines whirred, data streams flowed across holographic interfaces, and the faint scent of ozone filled the air. Ilara's focus was singular. If the Zolari were to return with a vengeance, humanity needed a deterrent, something that would make even the most war-hardened alien commander think twice. "What if we misdirect again?" one of her junior scientists suggested during a late-night brainstorming session. "Make them think we're developing another superweapon when we're actually working on something else entirely." Hillary shook her head. "They'll expect misdirection this time. We need something real, something they can't counter." The answer came from an unlikely source. During a routine scan of the debris field around Mars, one of the salvage teams recovered a fragment of Zolari technology, a power core unlike anything humanity had ever seen. The core was small, no larger than a human heart, but it pulsed with a strange energy that defied explanation. When the fragment was brought to Titan, Ilara's team studied it obsessively. The core seemed to manipulate space-time itself, creating localized distortions that could theoretically be weaponized. "What if we could turn this against them?" Ilara mused aloud during a briefing with her team. "Use their own technology to create a weapon they can't defend against?" The room fell silent as the implications sank in. It was a dangerous proposition. The core was volatile, its mechanisms barely understood. Experimenting with it could backfire catastrophically, but the potential payoff was too great to ignore. Admiral Riker was the first to voice his support. "If we can figure this out, it could change everything. It's a risk, sure. But what isn't in this war?" Riker set his coffee down, folding his arms across his chest. "They'll come back, sure, but they won't be the same. We rattled them, Ilara. They're scared of us now. That's a weapon in itself." Ilara wasn't so sure. Fear was a double-edged sword. It could drive an enemy to retreat, or it could push them to desperation, and desperate enemies made for unpredictable ones. In the weeks following the battle, humanity worked feverishly to capitalize on its fleeting advantage. Mars, battered and broken, became the staging ground for Earth's renewed defense efforts. Engineers, scientists, and soldiers poured onto the planet, salvaging what they could from the wreckage and fortifying positions for the inevitable counterattack. General Dominic Krauss had relocated to the Martian Command Center, overseeing operations with an iron will. The victory had done little to soften his demeanor. If anything, it had made him more relentless. "We need to keep the pressure on them," Krauss barked during a briefing with his senior staff. The room was dimly lit, the only illumination coming from the holographic displays that showed the Zelari fleet movements. "The moment we let up, they'll strike back, and we won't have another nemesis to bail us out." Saina Patel, now promoted to captain after her pivotal role in the battle, spoke up. "Our resources are stretched thin as it is. If we push too hard, we risk overextending ourselves. Mars isn't just a battlefield anymore, it's a liability. We can't defend it forever." Krauss shot her a glare, but it lacked its usual venom. She wasn't wrong, and he knew it. "Ilara and her team are working on new countermeasures," he said after a pause. "Until then, we hold Mars at all costs. This planet is more than a battlefield, it's a symbol. If we lose it, we lose everything." While the generals and admirals debated strategy, Ilara found herself drawn deeper into her work. Project Nemesis had been her brainchild, but now she was tasked with creating something even more ambitious. The Ilara would adapt, as all intelligent beings did, and humanity needed to stay one step ahead. In the dimly lit lab beneath Titan's surface, Ilara and her team worked tirelessly. The room buzzed with activity. Machines whirred, data streams flowed across holographic interfaces, and the faint scent of ozone filled the air. Ilara's focus was singular. If the Zelari were to return with a vengeance, humanity needed a deterrent. Something that would make even the most war-hardened alien commander think twice. "What if we misdirect again?" one of her junior scientists suggested during a late-night brainstorming session. "Make them think we're developing another superweapon when we're actually working on something else entirely." Ilara shook her head. "They'll expect misdirection this time. We need something real, something they can't counter." The answer came from an unlikely source. During a routine scan of the debris field around Mars, one of the salvage teams recovered a fragment of Zelari technology, a power core unlike anything humanity had ever seen. The core was small, no larger than a human heart, but it pulsed with a strange energy that defied explanation. When the fragment was brought to Titan, Ilara's team studied it obsessively. The core seemed to manipulate space-time itself, creating localized distortions that could theoretically be weaponized. "What if we could turn this against them?" Ilara mused aloud during a briefing with her team. "Use their own technology to create a weapon they can't defend against." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. It was a dangerous proposition. The core was volatile, its mechanisms barely understood. Experimenting with it could backfire catastrophically, but the potential payoff was too great to ignore. Admiral Riker was the first to voice his support. "If we can figure this out, it could change everything. It's a risk, sure, but what isn't in this war?" The project, codenamed Eclipse, became humanity's new focus. Every available resource was funneled into its development. The Zelari technology was reverse-engineered, adapted, and integrated with human ingenuity. The result was a weapon that could theoretically create temporary rifts in space-time, trapping enemy fleets in pocket dimensions where they would be unable to escape or communicate. But as the weeks turned into months, doubts began to creep in. The weapon was untested, its effects unpredictable, and the Zelari were not idle. Scouts reported increased enemy activity near the asteroid belt. Smaller skirmishes erupted as the Zelari probed humanity's defenses. It was clear they were preparing for something big. The final confrontation came sooner than anyone expected. Zalari warships, larger and more advanced than ever, emerged from the darkness of space, their numbers blotting out the stars. They didn't laugh this time. They came with the cold, calculated precision of a predator. Mars was their target, but humanity was ready. Elara watched from the command center as the Zalari fleet advanced. She felt a knot tighten in her chest. Eclipse was still untested, its activation fraught with uncertainty. But there was no choice. As the first Zalari ships entered firing range, Elara gave the order. The room fell silent as the weapon was brought online. Energy surged through the station, and the air itself seemed to vibrate with anticipation. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the space around the Zalari fleet began to ripple. The enemy ships wavered, their outlines distorting as if viewed through a heat haze, and then, one by one, they vanished. Cheers erupted in the command center, but Elara remained stoic. She knew better than to celebrate too early. "What's their status?" she demanded. A technician studied the readouts, his brow furrowed. "They're gone, trapped in the rift." Elara exhaled, relief flooding her, but it was short-lived. Another technician spoke up, his voice trembling. "Ma'am, we've got a problem. The rift, it's unstable." Elara's heart sank. The Zalari ships might have been neutralized, but the rift was growing, threatening to consume everything in its path. "Shut it down," she ordered. "We can't," the technician replied. "The core is overloading." The room descended into chaos as alarms blared. The very weapon they had created to save humanity now threatened to destroy it. Elara's mind raced. She had to find a solution, and fast. Failure wasn't an option. Humanity's survival depended on it. The alarms blared through the command center, their piercing wails drowning out the frantic voices of technicians struggling to contain the crisis. Elara Monroe's hands flew over the holographic controls, her mind racing to calculate the impossible. The space-time rift, which had swallowed the Zalari fleet, was growing unstable. If they couldn't shut it down, it wouldn't just consume their enemies. It would consume Mars, the station, and possibly the entire sector of space. The command center's lighting flickered as the gravitational distortions bled into reality. Screens glitched, displays warped, and Elara could feel an unnatural pull against her body, as if unseen forces were trying to drag her toward the anomaly. She clenched her jaw, forcing herself to focus. "Status?" she barked, her voice sharp enough to cut through the panic. "Containment is failing," one of the technicians responded, sweat beading on his forehead. "The Zalari ships inside the rift are still trapped, but the anomaly is expanding beyond projected parameters. If it reaches critical mass..." "We won't be here to worry about it," Admiral Riker finished grimly. He gripped the edge of the command console, his normally steady hands betraying a hint of tension. "We need solutions, now." Elara didn't need to be reminded of the stakes. The rift had been a gamble, an untested weapon designed to turn the Zalari's own technology against them. And it had worked. Too well. The energy core they had salvaged from the enemy wreckage had powered the device, but they had never fully understood its mechanics. Now their own arrogance threatened to destroy them. "We could try a controlled detonation of the energy core," one of the scientists suggested, his voice unsteady. "Force the rift to collapse before it expands further." Elara shook her head. "Too risky. If the detonation doesn't seal it properly, it could accelerate the expansion instead." "What if we reroute power from the station's reactors and stabilize the energy field?" another technician offered. "That could buy us time, but we'd have to maintain the balance manually," Elara muttered, already running calculations in her head. "If we're even slightly off, we could make it worse." Riker exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand over his face. "So our choices are rolling the dice on a detonation, or riding a dying horse until it kicks us off a cliff?" Elara ignored him, her mind locking onto a third, far more dangerous idea. "What if we don't contain it?" The room fell silent. Riker narrowed his eyes. "Explain." Elara turned to the holographic projection of the rift, its swirling mass of distorted space hovering above Mars. What if we amplify it instead, not let it expand uncontrollably, but direct its expansion, shape it into a weapon? The room erupted into murmurs. The idea was insane. They were already struggling to stop the anomaly from destroying everything, and now she was suggesting they make it stronger? "We don't have time to debate this," she pressed, turning to Riker. "Look at the projections. The Zelari still have reinforcement fleets outside the system. If we collapse the rift, we lose our one advantage. If we fail to contain it, we're dead anyway. But if we use it, redirect it, we turn it into a doomsday weapon," Reichert finished, realization dawning. He let out a low whistle. "You're insane." "Possibly," Elara admitted, "but it's our best shot." For a moment, Riker studied her, weighing the risks. Then, with a reluctant sigh, he turned to the technicians. "You heard the lady. Let's turn this mess into a cannon." The next few minutes were chaos. Orders were issued, calculations were adjusted, and entire sections of the station's power grid were rerouted. The goal was simple in theory, but hellishly complex in execution. Instead of trying to collapse the rift, they would create an artificial funnel, directing the energy outward in a concentrated blast. The problem? They had no idea what would happen when they fired it. As the final adjustments were made, Elara found herself staring at the swirling anomaly, its depths a dark void that devoured all light. Somewhere inside, the Zelari fleet was trapped in a limbo of collapsing dimensions, their ships frozen in a state of quantum uncertainty. It was poetic in a way. The Zelari had mocked humanity, believed them inferior. And now, they were about to witness what happened when a species pushed beyond its limits. "Power levels stable," one of the technicians called. "The funnel is aligned, ready for output sequence." Riker stepped up beside Elara, his expression unreadable. "Final call, Monroe. You sure about this?" She met his gaze, her voice steady. "No, but I'd rather go down fighting than waiting to die." He smirked. "Fair enough." Elara took a deep breath and pressed the command key. Fire. The station trembled as the modified rift cannon discharged. A beam of pure gravitational energy lanced outward, cutting through space like the blade of a god. The beam was unlike anything humanity had ever witnessed, a swirling vortex of compressed reality, a rippling distortion that tore through everything in its path. The Zelari reinforcements, just entering the system, never stood a chance. Their ships were caught in the blast before they could even react. One by one, the massive warships were pulled into the stream of collapsing dimensions, their forms distorting before vanishing entirely. The Zelari fleet, once so mighty, was now nothing more than echoes lost in the abyss. The blast continued outward, slicing through the darkness of space until at last the energy stabilized and the rift began to shrink. Slowly, steadily, the anomaly collapsed in on itself, the station's systems regulating its decay. Within moments, it was gone. The silence that followed was deafening. Elara exhaled, her legs nearly giving out beneath her. They had done it. Somehow, impossibly, they had survived. A stunned voice crackled over the comms. Is it over?" Riker let out a breathless laugh. "Hell if I know, but I don't see any more Zelari, so I'll take that as a yes."